Hi, and Suzanne. Who here comes from New York? Has spent time in New York? Fern, the Weisbergs, Arlene, come on. The accent follows you.
I talk with a Jewish inflection? That was my mother's favorite.
Yeah, now I know where your son got it from, but it's okay. He stole from the best.
Thanks.
And Natalie, good to have you. So I saw this film a couple of years ago. It's 2011, so it's 11 years old. And I was very taken by it when I saw it. And I don't know why I hadn't programmed it earlier, because this film has plenty of heart. And if you think back to a film we did see, Everything is Illuminated, it's based on another novel by Jonathan Safran Foer. So its roots are in the same place: his head, his imagination, his life experience. Stan Davids this morning said that Foer's work is always about getting back to your roots. And in a way, this one was as well. And you know, how humbling for Tom Hanks and Sandra Bullock to just, you know, step out of the picture and just be a role. I think they both did great work in it and totally appropriate. Who knew that Sandra Bullock was going to become a major player at the end? But let's not go there first. I want to start out with the buzz about this film when it came out. And this can be a film about how some worthy films don't get seen enough, the discussion about how some worthy films don't get seen enough. The critics didn't care for this film. And my brother-in-law, who recorded the live sound for it, told me, he said, the people complained it was too soon after 9/11 to make a movie like that. Now, we've talked before about how sometimes we look at the wrong things in a movie, right? It's true. There could have been some other disaster that caused Tom Hanks to die, right? It just happened to be 9/11. Now, that's a particularly fraught experience for the whole nation, not the world. And it was fraught for some of the people we met along the way. But it really didn't affect the core issues of the film. I'll bet you think I'm going to talk about the core issues next. I'm not. But I want to finish beating this dead horse that, you know, when you see the wrong thing in a movie and you turn your mind and your heart off to a film, you miss what's really there. You can miss what's really there. Now, a film has every obligation to you, the viewer, to be clear, to be focused, and to pursue its goals fairly with you, not to be coy like Power of the Dog, you know, not to hide issues if they expect you to be empathetic or to give a nuanced retelling of those issues. Filmmakers are, sure, they're about the filmmaker's intention and their expression, but there's an obligation to the viewer if you want people to see it and get it, you know, and it's up to you as a filmmaker to decide, am I going to court them or not? Is it a television show where I have to like get certain ratings because all the other episodes this year did? Of course, it's a script-driven medium where the direction almost doesn't matter. Or am I just going to make this for a select group of people, and, you know, the budget be damned and the studio be damned? You know, I don't care if it reaches a big audience. This is, I'm so passionate about this. And it goes back to a notion of celebrity, where sometimes even the most successful filmmakers, such as Martin Scorsese, whom we were discussing a few minutes ago, they need to be told, no, that's not a good idea. But sometimes they get to be so big, like Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, where there's nobody around to say, no, you know, I may believe in you, but that's not a good idea. I found that with Jerry Lewis too, who made lots of bad moves and bad films. And it's a matter of ego, where you begin to think that you're more important than the audience. And I think that this film does not violate that. It really takes care of the audience, maybe in ways that Everything is Illuminated did not, because that got kind of obscure and weird at times, weirder than this one ever did. This is quite linear. Now, that film was directed by Lee Schreiber, the actor, and I think he did a great job on it. This was directed by Stephen Daldry, who did The Hours and The Reader. Very cultured, sophisticated Englishman. My brother-in-law said he was great with the actors and a real fine craftsman and a joy to work with. I just thought it was a beautifully crafted film, and I was totally immersed in it. I have half the usual notes I took because I just was watching the movie. So my memory may be as shaky as yours because I saw it last night. So let's move on to the film itself. But there was a lesson there I wanted to talk about, the intention versus the perception. And sometimes people get distracted by a minor issue. And I think 2011 is bigger than nothing in this film, but it's not the whole issue. Does anybody want to talk generally about the film and talk about what is the issue? Or let's say, what are the three core stories in this film? Whose story is it? First of all, it's Oscar's, right? What are the other stories in it?
Susie, unmute yourself.
Unmute, lower left. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I thought it was the young man's story. His name in the movie was
Oscar.
Oscar.
Yes, it was. It was the lead.
Truly Oscar's story. And from the point of view of a teacher, it started many, many years ago. I had one child with Asperger's. They mentioned the word Asperger's just once. He said, my parents.
In the film, yeah.
Yeah, my parents took me to get a test. I have never, ever seen anyone in a film act like they really had Asperger's. That's exactly the way a kid acts. It was so spot on. He was really a good actor.
Okay. Hold on to that thought because he throws two really big tantrums at two very important parts of the film. And maybe you could throw some light on that when we get to it.
Okay.
But are there what other characters in the movie can
Arlene, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, the grandparents' story,
Uh-huh.
of course, was, I immediately felt that the Von Sydow character was his grandfather because of a few hints earlier on in the film. And I thought he did a wonderful performance.
Right. Without saying a word.
Yes. Without saying a word, his face is wonderful. And he uses his face to communicate so well. It was wonderful.
It was great. I was watching his face all the time and reading. The notes were particularly well written and worked out quickly. You could read them quickly. But again, it's like in a rough parallel is in Coda, where we got to see the hands as well as the facial expression. And together, they became more than 1 + 1. They were 3. And I think the note, and sometimes you'd see the note against, he'd hold it up and you'd see his face in the frame. It just added so much. And then the nuances, I think what you're pointing to, Arlene, is the nuances of his facial expression, the lips, the curl, the eyebrows, there was a whirl of speech in that face all the time. And the reactions to the boy were varied. He got fed up, he got impatient, he got offended, he had no yes and no on his hands, but he just provided us with such variety. He just told us what he was feeling with his face. Really a great achievement. I think he may have been nominated.
He was.
He was. Yeah.
He was.
All right, so
Steve
is there enough?
and Frank, you want to say something first, Jim?
Well, I was going to say who's the third character whose story it is, but let's
Oh, the
take a
mother.
question from Frank.
No, first is Steve
Okay.
and Frank.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess for me, there were 3 main stories. The boy, of course, Max von Sydow, And I thought the couple at the end, played by Viola Davis and Jeffrey
Yeah.
Wright, and I look at them as a tandem, actually.
Yeah.
Because they all suffered tremendous loss in the course of their life, and the
Yeah.
movie was kind of all about loss,
Yeah.
and how to try to heal from that. And so I thought those were the three main ones. You know, Sandra Bullock didn't really come up till the end of the movie,
Right.
where she was kind of lost, I thought, as a character in most of the movie. And then they finally brought her in at the end and wove her in. But clearly those were the three, in my opinion.
Okay, I think there's one more. Anybody? Have
Frank?
anything?
You also.
And then
Yes.
Arlene.
Hello?
Frank, unmute yourself, Frank. Frank, you're, yeah.
Okay, here I am. Steve covered some of what I wanted to say, but I think in addition to that particular couple, the whole reaction of all the people visited and interviewed and the various reactions to his story, I think was a story in itself, because it touched emotionally
Mhm.
how his search resonated with so many. I'm sure that, not all of them, these were, select whatever, as it would be, but the fact that it affected so many others, I think that was a story in itself.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask a question, though, in addition. Do we really know why the grandfather did not speak? Was that ever really clarified?
it wasn't stated, but let's face it, it's PTSD from the survivor syndrome. We didn't see the numbers on his arm, and maybe he wasn't even in camp, but clearly there were emigres from Germany. There's a clue early on in the movie when he's talking about his father. He said, I know they came from Dresden.
Yes.
I don't know much else.
Yeah.
And then we learn about Von Sydow. We don't even know his name.
Losing his parents.
That I had a son once, but I was afraid of being a father, so I left. Big theme in the movie. Again, that's a loss, right? So I kind of gave away number 3.
And would it have been, okay, so it's PTSD, so it's a forced reaction. It wasn't a voluntary kind of withholding of his voice in sorrow or something of that sort. That's all.
I didn't understand what you just said.
Well, PTSD, is it something that he could help? He could speak if he wanted to, or he was so damaged that he doesn't want to speak?
I don't think that matters. It doesn't matter. Some people are so damaged by PTSD, they don't recover fully. And, it's not like a bomb went off next to him and it disfigured his speech capacity. It's a choice, a psychological choice. I mean, Oscar has this beautiful explanation of PTSD in the film. He goes down to of a muteness, and he concludes with, it's psychological, you're choosing not to talk. So what damaged you so much? I mean, it's not the tantrum I was thinking of, but this kid is like brilliant, and maybe Susie or others can talk about people on the spectrum like that, who are just, they figured it all out, not because they were told, but because they just have these powers of observation, and they eventually make sense of things. I think the third story, if nobody wants to take a stab at it.
I have some, I think
Okay.
Jerry Raybo, you have your hand up, Jerry?
Yeah, I did. I had a question. What was the 6th borough? Was there really such a thing?
It was an it's a symbol. No, And if you want to go back to New York and look for it, you're welcome to. But boy, buy a piece of real estate in it if you can find it, because it's going to be worth a fortune. No, let's talk about that later. A beautiful metaphor. That's the author's brilliance. I think the third story is Tom Hanks's story, because he's the son who never had a father. And why do you think he is such a good father himself? That's why. He knows what the absence can do, and he knows that his son needs what he didn't get even more than he did. So all these 3 major characters are really suffering from the same absence. Why it's particularly tragic for Oscar to lose his father. Someone's waving their hand. Is that Arlene?
Yes.
Arlene.
As a New Yorker who lives in California, I think the biggest story is the most obvious one about the effect of 9/11 on not only the world, but the people of New York.
Yeah.
And, I remember the moment we were living in California, Los Angeles, the moment a plane struck, it was like almost 6 a.m. here in LA. My brother called, who was from New York, living in New York. And he said, turn on the television. It was 6 a.m. Turn on the TV. You can't believe what's going on. And truly, you could not believe what was going on. It was such an emotional experience to see planes hitting the towers and people dying and jumping out the window. It was unimaginable.
Well, I think you're right. That is what overshadows the whole picture. But maybe another way of putting it is that this film examines the fallout from that disaster, the personal, individual fallout. And it's true, but the other players, other than Viola Davis and Jeffrey Wright, were not players. I think almost none of them had dialogue lines. They were all like set pieces, all shot in the same, 2 hours. They probably did 2 or 3 a day. And they were wonderful performances, especially the lady who wouldn't admit anybody, who winds up tearing up her letter and, dismissing it, but you can tell she's really moved. It's like, there's that, it allowed us to go deeper into these stereotypes, this cross-section of humanity. So I can see why you'd say, yeah, it's all our losses and how this film primed us for that. But it could have been some other situation, and the other characters, could have been more incidental than they were. If we had not recapped all the characters that he visited at the end, you wouldn't have missed them. You wouldn't have missed that. So I guess I take issue with that's the major purpose of the film. I don't think it is. I think it's more personal and about loss and grief. Risa?
Lisa.
I have to disagree a little bit about it if it had been anything other than something that all those people had shared. If someone, when the mother came and prepared them for the boy coming,
Right.
The fact that they understood 9/11 explained why they opened their hearts and their homes to this family, because they understood it. If he had died of a heart attack or if he had been hit by a truck or whatever, I don't think the whole story would have held together.
So you're right. Everybody is opened their hearts up to Sandra Bullock and the boy when he finally arrived, because it was a way of healing themselves. Again, they lost a part of themselves when the planes hit the towers. And it was their way of, it was their kind of closure. They could heal one little boy's wound from this. But again, it's really, it's about the effect on the main characters. And it's the same story, just played out in a much larger scale with the 3 characters we discussed.
Yeah, but I think that's why the critics explained it away the way they did, because they saw the impact of 9/11 through the whole movie.
Well, it's a disservice because they drove a lot of people away from the movie.
I think that the critics also, I read the reviews and I was frankly quite surprised because they were pretty bad and I loved it. And I think that they dismissed it in large part. They felt it was too sentimental. And I found that extraordinarily offensive. And elitist. And as somebody who has a little boy, my own little boy whose father died suddenly when he was a little boy, I didn't think it was the least bit overly sentimental. I thought it was spot on in so many ways, and it touched me greatly.
I agree that that response is kind of befuddling, because just because you're a sophisticated critic doesn't mean you can't have emotions or be receptive to emotions that are worn on the sleeve.
Right.
I think Roz Weissman has something.
I think, Roz, did you have a comment? No. So Susie, and then Yvette and Risa. Susie, unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. I want to make the key a character. That was a major theme throughout the entire movie. I think that you're saying if he went to the door and said, why my father had cancer and he died, or a heart disease, or this or that, no, he wouldn't have gotten the empathy that he got from the people when he showed them the key. And he said, my father left this key, and I'm tracing all the people that have the last name of Black, because Black was on the envelope, and I really want to know what this key is for. That was a primary element in
that's the glue that connects one person to another,
right,
and the boy to his father, and we track it. As it turns out, we don't know what the key was for.
We don't know what.
We don't know what the key was for.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. It was for the bank deposit box.
But we don't know.
That was the key.
He
that
gave
opened the
it to
box.
Jeffrey Wright, but we never saw Jeffrey Wright open it.
You don't know what was in it.
We don't know what it was.
You
What
saw
was it
him
the key?
open and take out the papers at the very end.
But we didn't see.
You don't know the content.
You don't know the content, but you know that he opened the box and that there were papers in it, whatever they were. Could have been a deed, God knows what. But
I must have overlooked it.
Yeah.
Whatever was in the box was inconsequential to what he discovered on his journey.
Definitely.
That's the point. And that if that's what it took to get him to go on his treasure hunt, then great, and the healing that it brought to Jeffrey Wright and Viola Davis, and it's like it's the secondary fallout from, you can say, 9/11 or any serious loss, where when you're vulnerable in one area, it can inform another area where you're vulnerable and change your perspective, as it did for the two of them. There's a funny moment when he goes back to the junkyard and he says, can I go on the excavator's cab? And they say no. And then the next moment you see him operating the excavator. It's he got to these rough and tumble burly, guys. And that was particularly sweet and subtle and just in the moment, just quickly. So I'm not trying to deny or diminish how much we savored those moments where people showed their better selves. Right? I'm just saying that this is a film about the healing of the three characters. And it's part of the wisdom of the film, and probably the structure of the book too, where everybody has a hole in their hearts and everybody needs some kind of healing. We don't all get it, but they're going to wrap this film up with a dose of it. And, we can't bring anybody back, but the boy certainly grew from the experience. And it's just it works on us. You see, and this is what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, where you have to admit a film into your mind and your heart and let your feelings run with it. And that's why it's important to sort of see it on its own terms and not expect more of the film than it was trying to accomplish. Because then you'll run through the poetry of the film and the lyricism and the emotion that is at its core, that the filmmakers had at their core. Because the filmmaker's problem is, how do I get people to feel this, without being saccharine? You know, how do I get them not just to identify and understand, but oops, that's me. I want you all to know that I got Ethernet in my office, so I don't have problems anymore. That was just a weird one.
So we have a bunch of people who would like to speak.
Good.
Yvette, then Harriet, then Steve Greenberg, Risa, and Susie.
Okay, one of the things that kept in my mind and kept bothering me, and it's because I usually am very realistic about things, is the fact that here's this young kid running around all over New York by himself. You know, it kept getting in my way. How can he run around everywhere by himself? How can he even think about walking 11.2 miles?
Because it's a movie.
Well, in the first place, he was afraid of trains, so he did it on his own.
Right.
But he was just that driven. And once she saw what he was doing, when, you know, she laid the groundwork ahead so he wouldn't be mistreated by the addresses he called upon. She knew every address that he was going to and was there ahead of him. So it is a movie, you know, but magical things can happen. What can I say? You got to believe it. And, you know, he was extremely resourceful. I mean, look at the maps he drew and the
brilliant
indexing
kid.
system. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, he figured out how to get it done his way, you know, and so driven. So
Okay.
I'm not a mother, so I don't, you know, I would have wanted to have done all that at his age. My mother wouldn't let me do it, but.
So Harriet next, and Roz, I've added you to the list. You can put your hand down.
Harriet.
As someone who was an actual witness of 9/11, having lived across the street from the towers, I can say that everybody dealt with the trauma in his own way. The fact that this kid was, 12 or 13, and could manage to do what he did is incredible. And I agree with the previous speaker that for him to run around New York alone was unusual, to say the least. And he did it in the middle of the night, often at 3 a.m. for whatever reason. But the main fact is that I think the crux of the story was when he said his father would have been proud of him, because he said, I thought I couldn't live without my father, but I found out I can. And I think that would have made him proud. I think that was the key.
I agree. That's a closure on the main problem of the film. How is this boy going to live the rest of his life without his father? He's going to, you know, and it answers that, you know, we feel that because we're stronger for having gone through it.
Next, we have Steve Greenberg, then Risa, then Susie, then Roz.
I was just going to briefly say that the key was a classic example of what Alfred Hitchcock used to refer to as a MacGuffin, which was something that was extremely important dramatically in a movie, but ultimately meant nothing. And the proof of it was, no matter what was in that box, we never knew what it was. Classic MacGuffin.
Yeah. Can you think of one?
Nothing.
Can you think of one of them from his movies? I can't offhand.
Spell that?
The
Can you spell that word?
He invented it.
MACGUFFIN.
Is it Yiddish?
Sorry for what I said. It's a made-up word. He made that word up.
Like the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, well, right. That was the stuff that dreams are made of. That was worth a lot of money. In North by Northwest, they're after this idol. It's a sort of like clay pottery idol that eventually breaks, and it's got some microfilm in it. But we never find out what the microfilm is of, or what it means, or who it matters to. So,
but it gives you
it's
something,
just something that everybody's after.
Right, get the audience too. What is that? What's it about? What does it open? You know,
what are they looking for?
Technique.
What?
Right.
Right.
Why is everybody?
Why is it so important?
Right. and it just keeps you guessing, and that's tension, you know, sustainable tension.
Well, it's a
Yeah.
device. It's a device from mystery movies, often called a red herring.
Yeah, right. Also debaters.
Right.
And, yeah, it's meant to deceive and to distract attention away from the real stuff. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
that.
Steve. Risa. You're
You're
on mute.
muted. We get the hand motion, but you know, this isn't Coda.
I know. This started me on something else with the Ark of the Covenant, the Search. You know the movie. I can't come up with titles.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's it. So the couple sitting behind me at the end of the movie said, "I don't get it. I never saw Noah's Ark." They missed the whole thing. I thought it was hysterical. Are you ready to talk about Asperger's at all? Because that's what I had on my mind.
Let's exhaust the other topics and then we'll come back to it.
Okay.
All righty. Susie, then Roz.
I just want to come back to an Asperger's child at 12 years old.
Hold on, Susie. Susie, hold on. Jim just wanted to delay that particular.
Yeah, you and
just-
Rita can talk later.
Yeah, they
Unless there's-
stopped me, Susie.
I got you. Hold on, we'll come back to that. Let's have Roz and then Mona.
Well, first of all, he was a latchkey kid and he had the doorman under his thumb, sort of. And so he had a lot of freedom. And I always think of New York kids as being able to do a lot more than kids here. I don't know how accurate it is today if they're watched closely, but it seemed to me like it wasn't so unusual for him to be out running around, and his mother knew what he was doing. So yeah, I mean, his relationship with the doorman, he came and he went and he did what he wanted. He did school. So he had that freedom, and he was
But the doorman had his back too, because it's the doorman who.
Yeah.
told mother, he asked for the phone books to check on the current census, which wasn't for 7 years. So that was lie number 4, maybe. I forget the number of lies. He went up to 60, you know.
64.
But you're right. That's part of the support network that had been built up around this kid. But Sandra Bullock does answer that question at one point. She says, you asked me how I dealt with it, with his wandering around the city. I couldn't breathe until it came home every night, and then I could relax. It's a wonderful underplayed moment when he comes in and she sort of puts her hands to her face in the chair. So, you know, they try and deal with those issues, but we didn't see any threat to him, so it's outside the picture, outside the movie. Okay, should we talk about Asperger's now?
Oh, hold on, Mona has
One more question. Do you think that the family all knew that that was the father?
I don't know. I don't know.
I couldn't tell. He lived right across the street. And the grandma said, "Don't you look at him. Don't you even look at him. Don't ever talk to him if you see him." And I wonder if the mother knew, or even, what's his name?
Tom
His
Hanks.
son,
It
Tom
wasn't
Hanks.
stated. It wasn't stated, so we don't know.
That was weird.
Mona.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I thought the kids' journeys were presented very much from the kid's point of view. He had a great facility for minimizing his mother's role in his life. He was on this adventure, which at times was incredibly frightening and at times was exhilarating. And he was very single-minded, and he was fairly spectacularly incapable of empathy. So the way he's experiencing New York, there's a certain kind of magical unreality about it. It's his reality.
Right.
So I thought they were presenting these journeys very much from the kid's point of view.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. And I didn't think of it that he wasn't capable of empathy. A lot of, and we'll get to this, the Asperger's or autistic kids aren't capable of empathy. And there are many times when people reject him and it bounces right off him, whether it's Max von Sydow or somebody on his search. He manages to ask questions even when the people don't want to answer. He gets them all out. So he's very assertive in that respect because it's on his mind. He doesn't have much impulse control.
Natalie, you want to unmute?
This way now.
Good.
It's a little different today. I think there was also the theme of secrecy in this film in many of the characters. The grandfather, of course, was obvious. He did not explain why he was not speaking. He didn't want to talk about the horrors of World War II. I thought he was trapped with his family in some kind of a building that he saw most of them murdered. I don't know where I got that idea from, but that's what I thought. The mother is keeping the secret that she was going around to all the houses and before her son went. The boy is keeping the biggest secret, Oscar, and that was what was tormenting him, that he did not speak to his father on the phone. He knew he was calling. That was torturing him. That was a big point in the film when he finally tells this secret to his grandfather. And also his father had a lot of secrets that when his boy asked him, why did you become a jeweler and so on and so forth, he's not answering him. So I think that was an important factor in the film as well, which led you to move on and wondering what the next thing was going to be.
Well, let's talk about secrets. In a way, this is the complaint. And even when people are present and they have secrets, it creates a void or something that's missing between people when the secret is not shared, and it distances people from each other. I was going to save this for the end, but the last words of the film is the sixth message. Are you there? And really, that's the essence of the film. I mean, all of it's the essence of the film, but I thought that was a beautiful way to end it. You know, are you there? Are you there? We can never tell if somebody is all there with us or not.
That is right.
The eternal question. And love has to abide through that, not knowing. You know, he'll never see his father again, but he'll accept his love. You know, and it's a question. Who is that man behind the shade in his grandmother's apartment, the renter? You know, so secrecy is, I'm glad you used the word, because it's the secrets that keep people apart and prevent us from being whole. And we have to continue on despite the holes, you know, and it's very hard sometimes, especially with certain relatives.
So Joel, who hasn't spoken before, go ahead. And then Harriet, then Yvette.
Actually, my name is Helene.
Hi,
and
Helene.
I was one of the people when the movie came out and I heard what it was about, I did not want to see it. And so I was happy to see it now with some distance. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was we did not know that the mother was following him. And I went along with it. And I kept thinking, you know, maybe the mother should be more involved. But then that was the beauty of the movie, because we knew what the child knew. Mm-hmm. And then when we found out that in fact she was so involved. The other part that I thought was interesting was that he was able to tell his story to the person who couldn't respond. So that was a non-threatening person, because he couldn't judge him for what he thought he had done. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting part.
Helene, would you mind if we pursued further a few of the things that you said? Why didn't you see it when it came out, and what made you see it tonight And were your apprehensions taken care of?
I did not want to see it in 2011 because I'm a very emotional person and, was crying today. But at that time, I think it was too painful for me to see it. Maybe a movie like this, should have come out 10 years later. Sometimes people need distance in order to look at things. But I'm glad that I did see it. I'm really, and I thank you very much for pointing it out.
Well, I'm glad you saw it. I'm glad it affected you. At what point when you were watching it today, did you say, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it would be, or I'm able to watch this because the movie's so beautiful, or I'm so engaged with the people? How did you give yourself permission to watch it while you were watching?
I just think that because it was told through the child's eyes, and I recognize the fact that everyone was dealing with loss, and I just appreciated the acting, and it wasn't as hard for me as it could have been.
Okay, thank you.
Harriet, and then
one more question I have.
Sure.
The boy was so effective, and I did Google to see whether or not he continued his acting career. And the only thing I could find out was that he played on Jeopardy and did quite well.
He won $31,000.
Right.
He did act in, I think, 2 other films. The last was in 2016. And then I think he went to college, where he just recently graduated because he was born in 97. So he's 25 now, or 24. And it'll be interesting. Maybe he just wanted to have a normal life, but God, with talent, just raw talent. Now, we saw, while we're talking about him as a child, we saw in this discussion group a film called When a Monster Calls, about a 9-year-old facing the death of his mother, and everybody telling him it's going to be okay. And his buried secret was, I want it to be over. He couldn't stand he perceived it as hypocrisy, wanting his mother to die, because he didn't want his mother to die, but he wanted the pain for her and for himself to be over. And that was the big cathartic moment in the film. And there's something about young people spilling the beans. It's not doing the cathartic process enough to put it that way, but it's like when there's so much veracity that comes from something that's told so truly and felt so truly by these great young actors, it's like irresistible. It's the pain you love to feel because it's so genuine. And there's one other child film, but that I did think of that one tonight.
Harriet, and then Frank or Yvette.
I just felt terrible at one scene where the mother and son were talking, and he says, I wish it were you in the building. And she says, so do I. The trauma of that day just never goes away. It's just, the loss is always with you. I can speak personally. And this type of movie is a stark reminder of that painful day. So I really didn't enjoy it, although I admired its artistic ability. I thought the kid was wonderful.
It didn't produce any closure for you through the boy's eyes? I mean, you saw his book. You did, okay.
Everybody suffers in their own way.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Thank you, Harriet. Frank?
No, it's Yvette.
Yvette.
One of the things that we haven't discussed, and one of the things that I find still perplexing, is that even at the end, when he and his mother are, when Oscar and his mother are having the heart-to-heart, he still does not open up to the fact that his father did leave messages.
Oh, I think somewhere in there we can feel that. How did he get the answering machine without her finding it gone that day? It's like She probably heard it all as well, and he managed to keep it for himself. It's a little unexplained, but I can't imagine that she didn't know about the answering machine.
Do you think she knew about the answering machine?
Yeah, I think she heard all the messages, and it was devastating for her. You know, that's an.
Lisa,
that's
did you
how I-
want to comment on that?
No.
Whoop. No? You're muted.
I wanted to say we knew that he hid the answering machine and replaced it, but she knew about his closet and everything in his
Yeah,
room.
right, and the
So
answering
you
machine
have
was
to
there.
assume that
Yeah.
she had heard it.
So, right. But, you know, I'm glad you brought up that scene, because for her to say, I wish I were the one who died and not him, the mother is thinking of her son. She's thinking of her own loss that she feels. It's irreparable pain. And that's sort of love, you know, an example of love where you sacrifice yourself if you could. And that she didn't feel hurt by that. And she understood why he said it. I think was just a mark of her, that mother's love and her tolerance. Remember, she'd been living with this autistic boy or Asperger's boy for years. And both parents were very skilled at dealing with him. And it didn't seem to me to be out of character. And then after that,
Jim, did you remember the movie we watched about the prodigy, the math prodigy?
A brilliant mind, a brilliant young mind. Yeah, that's the other one. The same thing. The kid can't quite put it all together until he does at the end, and it's about his process
And
of
the
learning to love.
relationship with his mother and the difficulty of that just
Yeah.
made me think of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's parallel. It really is. And in this film, when he has his head on her lap, I think that scene ends with, I don't tell you that I love you enough, often enough. So that seemed to be big news there, gently put. And it's another kind of closure where he can expand his emotional universe more. He was daddy's boy. You know, and that was clear. The movie wasn't coy about that. Okay, shall we talk about Asperger's now from our two experts?
You got it. So Susie and then Risa. Susie, unmute.
First to unmute gets to talk. Oh, she beat you, Risa.
Here we go.
You got it.
I did some research recently, like 2 hours ago, about Asperger's, because I haven't given it a whole lot of thought since this boy was in my class, and he was only 6 years old. And unfortunately, his parents were pretty much in denial, and they didn't quite know how to deal with him. And maybe back in 2011, they could have gotten some more help for him. All of his symptoms were right spot on.
Are you talking about the movie or the boy you knew?
Boy, no, I'm talking about the boy in the movie and comparing him to the boy that I know personally, or knew personally.
But remember, the movie is set in 2001, 2002.
Well, I don't get the feeling that he was getting any help, but the symptoms were so right out there. First of all, no empathy whatsoever. This little boy would step on anybody's toes and not even know that it could have hurt someone, which goes to the young man in the movie when he would say things like, I wish you were dead and not my dad. There's no thought. A 12-year-old that didn't have Asperger's, I don't think would have said that. There would have been some empathy. What a horrible thing to say to my mom. And everything, he couldn't be touched. Did any of you notice that?
Well, his father could touch him.
You couldn't get close to him. Affection. she couldn't really be affectionate with
Right.
him. And I don't think that his dad could either. That was kind of misleading if you were to think that he was affectionate with his dad, because they were men and they played together and all of that. And his brilliance, never seen a kid with Asperger's that wasn't brilliant, really brilliant. This little boy could do long division, and he was 5 years old, and he could do all the adding and stuff, everything. I think that it's a medical disorder that needs to be, much more attention needs to be paid
Of
to it,
course.
or I'm not aware of all the attention that's being paid to it, because
Well,
it's hard.
as the years go by, there's much more public awareness of Asperger's being a wide variety of conditions. That's why they say on the spectrum.
Very hard to make friends, very hard.
Let's let Risa
Yeah.
chime in now.
Yeah. First of all, Asperger's is no longer an accepted diagnosis.
Right.
You're on the spectrum. And as far as the acting, the one I watch intensely is, oh boy, me and names, The Good Doctor on television, that series.
Yeah.
The physician is on the spectrum. And you see him have his tantrums, and you see him not being able to relate to what's going on and thinking at a whole different level. Asperger's, my grandson, who is now 17, was not diagnosed until he was 12. He was having tantrums in school. You couldn't touch him. He couldn't stand noise. He would go to a movie and curl up and want to be in the movie, but had his ears covered, and would watch, but he couldn't hear it. When he was finally diagnosed, it explained the tantrums that he had had. And the most beautiful moment that I can ever remember is the day that Stanley and I went into the house, and he put his arms around our waists and he said, "I love you." He had never hugged us. He had never touched us. He had never said, "I love you," until after the diagnosis, and he was treated with a therapist, and his parents were taught how to live with him, and we were taught how to live with him. When he, for example, in a restaurant, he would become extremely frustrated by the noise around him, by the fact that the waiter didn't bring the food immediately, by the conversation that we were having. And he learned to say, "I need to be excused." He would walk out of the restaurant, spend 10 minutes walking in the parking lot, get himself together, come back in, not say anything, but sit down with us. He's now getting ready to go to college in a year, and he is not a different person, but he's a controlled person, and he understands his symptoms. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but it's very hard for him to operate in a classroom. He's in a school that's one-on-one. All the kids are being taught one-on-one, and they all have either a problem with things like Asperger's, or they're brilliant kids or Hollywood kids who can't go to a regular school and follow a regular schedule. And it has saved him. It has saved us. It has saved his family, his siblings, once we understood what it was. All the symptoms in the movie were absolutely correct. That's true, Susie, you're absolutely right. It was very, very well done. And I agree with the comment about his walking around the city by himself. We lived in New York, 64th and 2nd. We were 68th and 2nd. We were right in the middle of everything. Kids would come up out of the subway stop on 68th and Lex, and they would walk to all the schools around wherever they were going, even as young as they were, because that's part of New York. Right. They had an independence that you don't see anywhere else. I don't know what it is today. The world has changed, but when we were there, that's what I saw. But I have all this I guess I have the empathy that my grandson doesn't have, but I understand him now, and he can be brought to a different place. I think the parents, the words that were used were that it was not, what was it? I was tested for Asperger, but it was not, there's a word for that they weren't sure.
Was not definitive.
Not definitive, that's it. It was not definitive. But the parents were aware. The father was dealing with him strictly on the level of the intellectual. And I have to assume that at some point, either he did it out of natural understanding or he was directed that way. So I don't know which, but I was very moved by the entire movie, and the child was terrific. And the Asperger's definition was supposed to be that these kids were extremely bright and should be handled that way, and to understand what their symptoms were, and then to realize that it could be, the child could be anywhere on the spectrum, and didn't have to be at the high end, which is what they thought Asperger's was. You can have Asperger's and be lower on the spectrum list. Anyway, that's my feelings about the movie. I loved it.
Thank you for sharing. Stan said it was only a one hanky movie, not a three hanky movie.
It's your turn, Jim.
Yeah, we saw it twice, Jim.
Okay. Oh, so one hanky per movie. All right, so we're close. You know, I'm glad we all saw pretty much the same movie. It was so artful. Let's talk about the two tantrums. I don't even remember where they were. There was one, it's with Von Sydow, when he walks out and he gives him, you know, Von Sydow answers a couple questions, but chooses not to answer and says it's time to go. And the boy persists out of a lack of empathy. And then he lowers the gun and he says, you know, is that where he says, you choose not to talk, you know, because you're hiding something or some deep pain that you can't face. To me, I think that's terribly observant. And what's the difference between empathy and great powers of observation? I mean, you can't have empathy without, well, I guess you can't have empathy without observing a procedural thing. You feel it. An observation is a mechanical way of describing a process. And an empathy is feeling its result. Does that make sense? Is that relevant?
The child sees it, but cannot feel it. That feeling is what's missing. That feeling, not just of empathy, the feeling of love is very hard for them to express.
Yeah. But at the peak of that tantrum there, he's feeling anger. And I think it was because Von Sydow was withholding from him. So it was his frustration at not taking care of my need to know. And to me, this goes back, that's part of the theme of loss, of not knowing somebody, the void that those secrets create in our lives from each other. And some of us react more violently and are more hurt by it than others. It's just, there's all this resonance within the movie. It's one thing I liked it so much. It's a novel. I mean, the guy's a great novelist. I want to read everything else he's written. You know, and he's just this Jewish soul, excuse me for using the term, who sees things so empathetically, yet with such great powers of analysis. It's remarkable. And I don't know what he's doing now. He's also a vegan, which we know from everything is illuminated. But so we'll have coffee with him instead, but when he comes out here. Any other comments? All right, if nobody else wants to, Arlene, thank you. It's such a good movie. I hate to leave it early. Unmute yourself. We want to hear every special word
Sorry,
you
I didn't
say.
realize. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay. I did love the movie, but again, I think more like some of the critics thought when Sandra Bullock made her revelation to him, that she had followed him around and she had smoothed the way basically and kept track of where he was. I was not happy with that. It felt to me like it was Hollywood tidying up the relationship to try to make it more plausible.
Maybe. Well, without that, how would you have ended the movie?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
was thinking about that.
Maybe that's why he invented that to
Yeah,
help create
maybe,
closure.
but it didn't feel right.
Okay, I hear you.
It was just off the track. It wasn't consistent.
No, she disappears for the middle of the movie and she comes back for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, and says, I was with you all along. I felt like a lot of bull.
Yeah.
But if we had known she was doing it all along, wouldn't that have taken some of the steam out of his treasure hunt? Some of the tension, some of the risk, some of his need, and it would have what?
I thought the mother was very, very withholding.
Well, maybe there was some other way,
And
make her not withholding. Some other way to include her in the process. I don't know. And maybe there was stuff there that was cut, in the book or in the screenplay. Other people, may have decided that this was a need and a concern that had to be met. And ultimately they tossed it.
Yeah.
I do want to mention that you asked what the author of the original book was doing.
Yeah.
And I can fill you in a little bit on that. He wrote a book called Here I Am. It's really I loved it. It's a great read. It is about what happened to his life after these books that he wrote. And one of the weird things that happened in his life, and I'm thinking that he may be a bit on the spectrum himself, because apparently what happened is he engaged in a lengthy email correspondence with Natalie Portman about starring in his movie. And they went back and forth quite a bit and had very good conversations. And he decided in the course of those emails that he was in love with her. And he told his wife, and he left his wife. And Natalie Portman said, "Are you crazy? I'm married. We're not in a relationship. I'm not the least bit interested in it." And his life turned into a mountain of a mess.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's a huge mess. And the book, Here I Am, does deal with that a little, in some of that about somebody whose life turns into a big mess. And it's about his Jewish journey. And it's a very interesting read, but you need to know that little bit of backstory. And my thinking was that somebody who read it so badly probably has some of that on the spectrum himself.
Okay.
So Steve next, and then we'll get back to Susie.
Mona.
Mona.
I was just going to say that I found Sandra Bullock's performance extremely flat and very disappointing. And I did not find the movie sentimental at all. And that was actually something I greatly admired. I agree with Arlene that this notion that the mother, she actually theoretically precedes Oscar in all of his travels. She's deciphered his whole system and somehow is able magically to predict which trip he's going to take which day. But which I'm willing to accept that in the movie, but it's possible that somebody threw that in there to allay the concerns of, anxious audience members. How can you have a kid wandering around Brooklyn and Queens, et cetera?
Yeah.
But I just found Sandra Bullock's performance so flat. It's one thing to be subtle, and I wasn't expecting histrionics, but I found there was very little subtext. And I found the performance empty and incredibly disappointing.
How did you feel about Tom Hanks then, who was actually over the top for Tom Hanks, but you saw those moments of secrecy that he shared with her that sort of clued us into where he was?
Oh, I found his, he was warm and engaging, and he had a rhythm with the kid. Mm-hmm. The movie is told very much from the kid's point of view, so that he he's kind of written her out of his life. It's as if in Oscar's head, she doesn't count. She's just this figurehead. Somehow food shows up or he has clothes or whatever. But
how's that different from every other man in America?
She's meaningless.
Yeah,
I expected to see more frustration, more devastation, more straight out anger from her. I mean, this kid must have been a nightmare to deal with on a daily basis. Yeah. And I wasn't feeling that from her. I sensed the depression at the loss of her husband. But for one thing, I never got a sense of a complete bone-crushing fatigue. She would have been in a state of total exhaustion.
It's like we can't second guess the writers, whether it was in the book or it got cut. It's fine that you identify that it didn't ring true for you because of it. It's one of the compromises you make when you're making a movie. It may have been there, and then they just decided we would rather lose this than something else, because it was over 2 hours. It's like 2:09 already, which is long for a Hollywood movie. My brother-in-law did tell me that apparently she was not the first choice for the role, and he and I haven't had a chance to discuss who was the first choice and what would have been like. I think that the mother's role was underwritten, and that the director chose to play her that way. Maybe he had to tone her down and knocked her down too far. I don't know. You can't tell. I don't have any answer for that.
Steve Greenberg, you want to unmute, and then Susie?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I didn't think of this while I was watching the film, but I did during the discussion, because I had a problem with the mother just saying at the end, "Oh, I followed you everywhere. I always had my eye on you." And while she was saying that, I wish they could have intercut some flashbacks to him on the subway, for example, when he finally did ride on it. And down the aisle is a woman in a hat and dark glasses and maybe even a wig keeping an eye on him. I mean, I don't mean to be facetious, but
yeah,
if we could have seen how she was keeping an eye on him, if she could have read all his material and figured out and notified all these people in advance and even gone to see them, she could have very easily, just as surreptitiously, followed him, and we would have then seen that she was doing it, as opposed to just hearing her say it and thinking, well, how could she have possibly done that? And he was on foot, so would she follow him on foot too? Maybe in a cab, I don't know.
It's like, how far do you go with it, by proving she was still a good mom because she made sure he was safe. I mean, the element of risk, it sort of increases our sense as, boy, this is really incredible kid. Look how he navigated the city on his own. But
well, the old phrase, seeing is believing. If I had seen her in retrospect doing that, I would have believed it a little bit more.
Okay.
Rather than her just saying it.
Yep.
Susie?
So does anybody agree with me? We've been talking a lot about Hollywood scenes and whatever. I felt at the end, I adored the movie until the very end, when Oscar is running after the limousine or the cab and running after him and running after him. And I thought that was the appropriate ending for Grandpa to leave. Okay, that I was going to be okay with it. It was sad. But when Grandpa shows up, he writes him a letter, I guess. He wrote to him.
Wrote everybody a letter.
Shows up and he's back. And Grandma's walking down the hall with him to give him his apartment. I thought, how Hollywood is this? The next thing we're going to do is see them in bed together, because it just was too, it was too fixed.
Too neat. They tied up that story too neatly.
The ending was too contrived. It happened too fast. Anybody agree? I don't mean that they get in bed together. I just mean that it
we know what you meant.
The ending.
Jeff and Robbie are waving
Right.
at us.
Well, someone tell me what the book was. Who put that book together? Grandpa or the kid?
The kid, it was his diary. He's taking photos all the time. We saw evidence of it earlier.
Yes, the photos.
The photos went into the book.
Gave it to his mom? How was she ending? It was
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Frank, you want to unmute?
Where'd they go?
They're here.
No, I had nothing more to
Okay.
say.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Anybody else?
Oh, okay. All right, well, let's talk about 2 weeks from tonight. We're going to discuss Drive My Car, winner of the Oscar for Best International Film. And I'm preparing you because it's 3 hours long and you may want to watch it in more than one sitting. I hope you do watch it, can watch it in one sitting. I hope you watch it twice because it will enrich the discussion for you. It seems to be very complex and seems to be going nowhere while it's going somewhere. And one thing that would be helpful is if you were to look up the synopsis of the play Uncle Vanya by Anton Chekhov. This is the play that a Japanese director, who's pretty well known, is going to direct in a remote theater festival in Japan. And there are lots of references to the play. There's some rehearsal scenes. As you see, the director he's casting for the actors, and he's very remote in his casting audition questions. And he's very remote in his direction to the actors during the rehearsal phase once they've been cast. And there's all a reason behind his method. And throughout this film, he has a driver who's assigned to him by the festival to take him from his hotel, which is an hour away from the festival site. And the film is described as about their relationship, and she really doesn't enter into it until about the last hour. So I encourage you not to give up until she becomes a major player. In fact, it becomes a duet about both of them, and the other characters are less important. She's observing and hearing everything. She's one of those people who doesn't have to say anything. You see her looking in the rearview mirror after she's eavesdropped on conversation. You see her out of the cab waiting for him. There's all kinds of clues that she's going to be key, but she's very much not involved. She's a presence for the first 2 hours. But seeing Uncle Vanya will help. It may help you to know that he was a widower. He lost his wife several years before the movie happens. There are flashbacks to her. And I won't ruin what their relationship was about and what devastates him so much. But that devastation carries forward into the play and into his relationship with the driver. And it's really about a kind of existential despair and loneliness, similar to what we've been discussing in this film, except it sort of asks the question, what am I living for? What is there left for me now? It's kind of like what is Oscar asking, how can I live my life without my father, and has to find a way of living. There's a similar kind of closure at the end of this one. It's more subtle. When I finished watching it the first time, I said, there's more here than I could absorb in one screening. So I know I will be seeing it at least one more time. I urge you to be patient. It may not work for you, and that's okay. It's not as egg-headed as you may think. It's not as complex. It's very serious, but it's very emotional as well. And I just encourage you to give it a chance to work on you. It's a slow burn. And if you like that kind of movie, great. But it is really about so much about where we all are as individuals and couples, and what is our place? How alone are we? How alone are we not? It's a really important statement, and it's a great manipulation of cinema to bring about something that's almost inexpressible in other ways. Other arts do it too. Performance art, painting, still photography, dance. Art really is about the inexpressible made to be understood through means other than words, unless it's a play or poetry or a novel. And so I urge you to spread your wings a little bit and be a little generous with this film. It will reward you, I hope. So, and take notes if you want, if you have questions. They all get answered. And watch the rehearsals, watch the performances. excuse me, watch his direction of them. He's almost like a psychotherapist. He doesn't tell them anything. They say, what do you want me to do? The actors all say, how can I please you? You're a famous director and I'm a rural actor just starving to get by and just, I'm so want to work with you. What can I do to please you? And he doesn't want them to please him. He says, bury yourself in the words. And it's a dodge, but at the same time, he's telling them to struggle with it on their own. And that is a directorial tool in the theater and in film. Although in film, you don't usually have the time to let an actor struggle on their own with something, whereas you have a long rehearsal period in drama, or never long enough, but where you work on those issues and those themes. It's really worthy of its award. And if you have any problems when you're seeing it or after, give me a call. We can talk about it. I have a little time in the next 2 weeks. And see it a second time. It may make it clearer to you. But it's really important. If you love movies, you got to be in touch with this one. So thanks for tonight. I'm glad you all like this film, regardless of degree. And we'll see you 2 weeks.
Where is Drive My Car available?
I believe it's Amazon. It might be. I'll make sure it's in the announcement that I send out. It's either Amazon, Netflix, or HBO Plus. You can buy a single subscription wherever it's streaming. Mona, you will love it. Sorry. And you get to read Uncle Vanya again because it's not a new discovery for you. Oh, I have to share something with you. In my discussion of it with South Bay, Kathy, maybe you remember this, somebody said, I don't get it. Why is a Japanese director, why did they choose a Russian play? I mean, the cultures are so different. And I had to explain that Chekhov is performed all over the world to this day. And I even said, and it's just like Fiddler on the Roof, which is still performed all over the world to this day. In fact, they feel there's a production of it being played every day somewhere in the world. And it's like there's some things that are just so universal, like Chekhov. He speaks to so many different cultures in different ways, but all it's kind of about the same feeling. This is what humanism is about. If you think, oh, humanism, that's just, secularism, or it's moral relativity. No, it isn't. It's about where we live fundamentally, what we share with somebody in India or Japan or Africa. Is like on a human fundamental level, where can we understand each other? And that's what makes great art. It connects all of us, no matter who we are, to this thing that is the subject of the art. And it's a mystery. You ask a painter, how do you paint? How do you do that? I just do it. I feel it. Yes, Sondheim. Yeah, he works hard and he figured it all out, but he's feeling these things. Where do they come from? It's part of it is, they're letting us share in that joy and mystery of it. And it works on us. My final comment is Freud said he didn't understand music because it was irrational. He didn't know why people liked it because he couldn't figure it out. So, and to that I say, well, he was a neurologist and, because he knew all the nerves in the body, he thought he should be able to figure everything out. And he didn't, but there's some things we just can't know. And that's what art is for. Make us feel a little better about it. Okay, so thanks for a great discussion and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, same to everybody.
Happy Passover, everybody.
Pesach Sameach.
Pesach Sameach.
Chag Sameach.